Okay, thank you, Professor Robuste. Thank you, Francesc, for this nice introduction. I'm glad to be here today, and also thank you to the organizers of this forum to allow me to present part of our research, the research I've been doing with my team of PhD students in the last years about vehicle sharing. So this will be only an overview, so we'll not go deep into the details of the research because we have 1 hour, and just to show you what are the main ideas and main topics that are interesting in these important new management strategies of vehicles in cities. So here you can see in this first slide an outline of what I'm going to talk about. So I will divide the presentation in 3 parts. First, I will present a bit the concept of vehicle sharing because there's many different words, many different characteristics. So we're going to focus on which kind of system we want to analyze. After, I will focus a bit on bike sharing, and it was the start of all these micromobility systems of vehicle sharing. So I will explain a bit the evolution of bike sharing systems since the 60s until today. Then I will enter a bit more technical part to talk about the planning of these systems and the existing trade-offs. And then I will focus a bit on the operations, how we operate these systems. I will illustrate this planning and operations part of the talk with examples of the BSync system, which is the bike sharing system in Barcelona, with some of the works that we published regarding this system. Then I will end with some final thoughts, and I have already shared to you the references of this talk, so that if you want to go deeper, you have several references available. So 3 learning goals, very simple. What is vehicle sharing? How we can design vehicle sharing systems to reach efficient operation, and then how we can operate them so that they are viable in the long term. So this is the 3 learning goals that you should get from this talk today. So first thing, why we want vehicle sharing systems? So individual transportation vehicle sharing systems are is an individual transportation mode, and this has big benefits because you travel when and where you want. So it's different than collective transportation when you share the trip, that you need to adapt in terms of time. So you need to wait, and you need to adapt in terms of the routing, the stop. So here you can travel when and where you want. So this is very good in terms of the user desires. But then traveling with your own vehicle, with private vehicle, has important costs. So if we can share this cost without many users, then this can be cheaper. So the idea of vehicle sharing is to share the capital cost of the vehicle and other fixed cost, and also eliminate from the user the parking and garaging needs, so that this also reduce the overall requirements of the fleet sizes in cities. So we can have less vehicles because they are used more efficiently, and we can also reduce the requirement for parking space. So this is why sharing vehicles can be important for users and also for the mobility systems in cities. Then what we understand for vehicle sharing, there are different words, different systems, and I will try to focus this talk on what I understand for vehicle sharing systems. For instance, I do not understand as vehicle sharing the ride sharing concept of mobility, where you share the vehicle but also the trip with other people. So this is kind of collective transportation. If you share the ride with other people, you need to adapt temporally and spatially. So it's not individual transportation. So the carpooling, where different people pool rides in a personal vehicle, or the van pooling with pre-arranged rides for a group of passengers for some route in a company or in a neighborhood, or these paratransit or small scale transportation systems. These are not considered vehicle sharing systems. They are ride sharing, sharing the ride. Still they share obviously the vehicle, but this is not what I'm going to talk about today. Regarding vehicle sharing, we can think of ride hailing when you request a trip on demand through any kind of technology or platform, or simply by hailing. But then you hire the vehicle with a driver. So this is not vehicle sharing either. So this can be traditional taxi cabs or services provided like this kind of Uber-like companies that provide vehicle sharing with a driver. So these ride-hailing systems, I do not talk today. I do not consider them to be vehicle sharing systems. What I want to talk today is about a system where you provide a fleet of vehicles available, publicly available to the society, so that they can take these vehicles without a driver and make a trip within the city. The vehicle can be whatever. It can be a bicycle or a scooter or a car. So these define different types of systems. So car sharing, bike sharing, whatever. Inside these vehicle sharing characteristics, there are peer-to-peer systems where it's the users sharing their own cars, or there are corporate vehicle sharing, which are the cars are owned by companies which provide service to the small community of the company only. So we will not focus on this either. So we will focus on public vehicle sharing. So the vehicles are available to anyone who wants to register to the system. So these are called public vehicle sharing or commercial vehicle sharing systems. So these are the ones that we're going to talk today. So what are the characteristics of these urban vehicle sharing systems? So they are an evolution, I would say, that the traditional vehicle rentals, which technology has allowed to increase the flexibility and suitability of these systems for urban trips. So typically you require membership to the system, and then you require some kind of mobile app or mobile app to access this system. So to make a reservation or to pay, and then to access the vehicle either in a stop or that it's parked in a street. Then you pay the trip per minute. Typically, you don't pay as before in a rental for a daily basis. You now pay per minutes. And the most important revolution with respect to the traditional vehicle rental is that these systems allow one-way trips. So you rent the vehicle from one origin to one destination that they are different. So you don't need to return the vehicle to the origin. So they allow what's called one-way trips, and this is the big revolution of vehicle sharing. So these allow to make on-demand trips in urban environments with less costs than owning a private vehicle, and probably a bit cheaper than hiring a vehicle with a driver, than hiring a taxi. And as I said, this is available for different types of vehicles: cars, bicycles, scooters, or whatever. So this is what we're going to talk today. So these systems do not come without complexities. So it's not that easy as only putting a vehicle fleet available to the society. So the management of these systems involve additional costs. So why these costs appear in vehicle sharing? So the reasons are because it's difficult to chain different trips for different users, because many times the destination of the first user is not the same as the origin of the next, so that we cannot chain directly these trips. So also many trips different times of the day follow the same direction. So then there's imbalance in the vehicle fleet across cities, so that then the vehicles tend to accumulate in some zones in some specific times of the day, and other zones there are not available vehicles to be picked up. So there's a big imbalance in the vehicle distribution across the city in different periods of the day, and this needs to be balanced artificially, and this will imply additional cost. And also, the demand is not constant. The demand fluctuates across the day. There are peak hours, there's uncertainties, there's more demand some days, less than others. So in order to accommodate this demand uncertainty and these peak hours, we need to oversize the fleet. So we need to put more vehicles so that we will have some vehicles that are sometimes idle, because during off-peak hours these are not used. So this involves additional fleets, and this involves vehicle repositioning of operations, and these are costly. So this involves costs to the system. If these costs are not properly managed, the system can turn to be excessively expensive and to be not successful. And this is why some systems start, but they don't. They are not kept over time, and they at the end they die because of excessive cost or bad planning and bad management. So this is why it's important to analyze carefully when you're going to implement the vehicle sharing systems in some region. Then I will start after this first introduction about why we want to design vehicle sharing systems. I will start a bit of a history of the evolution of bike sharing systems, which are kind of the paradigm of vehicle sharing initiatives. So here you have a picture. This is the first bike sharing implementation. They were called the white bikes, and this was in the 60s in Amsterdam. This was an initiative of a group of outsiders, I would say, who were protesting against the increase of the car usage in the city of Amsterdam. And they they proposed this white bike system as a kind of a protest against the system and against the government, who in the 60s, like in everywhere in the developed world, was promoting the usage of the car. So this man, Lud Schimmelpenninck, sorry for the pronunciation, is considered to be the father of the vehicle sharing, and he was involved in many of these very early implementations of bike sharing. So this Amsterdam initiative, which is called the first generation, it was quite just anecdotic, with only 50 bicycles to be left for being freely used across the city. So obviously, you could not control the users, you could not identify them, and the plan was short-lived because the bicycles were stolen or were damaged, and also even the authorities removed the bikes because they thought that this was a revolution against themselves. So this system was very short-lived, but it was the first implementation ever of the vehicle sharing concept. The second generation appeared many years after, in the 90s, and the paradigmatic implementation was Biciclen in Copenhagen. So this was the first large-scale implementation with over 1,000 bikes and 100 stations for locking them. And for the first time, you need to put a coin to unlock the bike, so that the bike, if you want to recover the coin, you need to return the bike. Still the user was not identified, and a lot of bikes were stolen, and still it was difficult to keep going the system because of this non-identification of the user. So this is the second generation of bike sharing systems. The great revolution came with the third. With the third revolution in the 2000s, so the technology was already developed so that you could identify the user with a membership card, and then when you requested the bike was linked to the user who was using it, and then this reduced a lot the theft of bicycles and also the vandalism. Even that this third generation started promoted by an advertising corporation, JC Deco, in Vienna, and after it was implemented in Lyon. The paradigmatic case, so the big revolution, came when this system was implemented in Paris. So in Paris in 2007, it was developed the Belip system, and then from there it was that the bike sharing system was open to the wall. Everybody was looking at what was Paris doing for trying to develop their own systems in their own city. So from after the Paris implementation, many cities worldwide, big cities, starting implementing bike sharing in this station-based configuration. Barcelona was amongst them. After this system in Paris, Barcelona used the same kind of implementation. This was called the third generation, and it's considered that from here, it's the modern history of bike sharing. After this came what's called the fourth generation, which the main change with the previous was that the stations were not needed and were eliminated and were changed by the tracking, by GPS tracking of bicycles. So the vehicles, the technology allowed to geolocalize the vehicles with GPS, so that you could know at every time where the vehicles were, so that you don't need stations to keep the bicycles in that place. So the bicycles could be everywhere because they were geolocalized, and you can find them on your mobile apps. So these are called free-floating or dogless bike sharing systems. They need the usage of smartphone apps. So it's this is why it was after the third generation. And these generally were implemented with electric vehicles already. And because there was not the need of stations, not the need of such public involvement in the implementation of the system, many private companies started developing their own systems, and many cities allowed different vehicles to start developing in their cities. So this created problems because the vehicles were cheap, different types of vehicles, scooters, very small bicycles were appearing in large amounts in cities, parked everywhere, so clogging the urban space, making difficult the shared urban space with pedestrians. So this implied problems with the usage, with the correct usage of the system, with the control of the system, and with the sharing the urban space with other modes. So this fourth generation was specifically implemented in Asian cities, and there where the main problems were observed. So now, as a response of these problems of the fourth generation, it has appeared what can be called the fifth generation, where the vehicles still do not require a station, but the parking zones are controlled, and this is called a geofence. So are controlled so that you cannot lock your bicycle unless it's in a predefined zone, even if there's no physical station. So there's a zone painted or somehow delimited within the city, and the vehicles can only be parked when you are inside the zone. If the vehicle is detected to be outside the parking zone, it does not allow you to leave the bicycle there. So this helps. This is kind of a mix between free floating and station based. Conceptually, it's a station based system, but it eliminates the infrastructure cost of the docks of the vehicles. So this is more or less the evolution of the bike sharing systems since the 60s and up to today. And you can see that this is available, and it's this bike sharing wall map. It's online, and it allows you to see which systems are operating and which ones had already closed. You can see them in red. So typically there was a revolution in the early 2000s. So many cities, even small cities, implemented bike sharing, and as you will see in the later slides, you need a critical demand so that this for being successful. So many systems in small to medium-sized cities closed after the first days of operation because excessive costs. And now the implementations are located mainly in Europe, also in China, and also some of them in the west and east coast of the US. So you can check this web, and you will see, you can check the characteristics of the different implementations. So let's move to the next part of the presentation, which is about the design, planning, and operation of vehicle sharing systems. So when you want to plan a vehicle sharing system, you need to take several decisions, and these decisions are characterized by some decision variables. So you need to take decisions, and this will be modeled, or will define a decision variable. So the first decision is the fleet. When you have defined which type of vehicle you want to use, for instance, let's talk about a bike sharing system, we're going to use bicycles, then the decision variable will be what should be the size of this fleet. So how many vehicles we need to use. So this is the first decision variable, the number of available vehicles to users. Then you need to define the service area. So this is the area where the vehicles can be taken and need to be returned. So it's the service area within the city. Given the service area, you define which type of system you want to implement, either station-based with physical stations or free-floating. We're going to see the pros and cons of each in a minute. Then when you have decided which type of system, then you need to decide if it's station-based, the number of the stations, and the location and size of these stations, how many parking slots you provide to these stations. These are the two most important planning decisions: the fleet size and number, location of stations, if free, or deciding on free floating. Then it comes the operational part. Then you need to decide how many teams, how many repositioning teams you devote to the system to move the vehicles, so rebalance the system, move the vehicles from one part to the other, also to take care of maintenance operations. And if the vehicles are electric, you may need to implement some kind of operational strategy to recharge the battery of these vehicles. So the decision variable here is how many repositioning teams you devote to this system. And finally, these vehicle sharing systems require a central control, which manage all the operational aspects of the system, like the memberships, taking operative decisions, and also the legal and commercial aspects of the business. One important decision variable here is the fare, how much you may pay per minute or per trip to the users that are taking your vehicles. So these are the main decision variables that you need to determine when planning a vehicle sharing systems. Just a few notes on the characteristics of free-floating versus station-based systems. So what are the pros and cons of free-floating systems? So no stations. Obviously, less infrastructure cost. You don't need to build stations. You don't need the space to build the stations. But you require the collaboration of the local authority to accept the on-street parking of your vehicles. So some cities do not allow this. You in free floating, you track the vehicles. The vehicles are equipped with GPS, so you track all the times. So this makes possibly less prone to theft, but they are left without the protection of a station. Then even if they are not stolen, maybe they are more prone to vandalism that if they were parked in a station. So free-floating systems have higher vandalism rates than station-based systems. Obviously, to apply this, you need a strong connectivity in the service area because the vehicles need to be all the time connected. And regarding the accessibility, the access distance to the vehicles with respect to users, in general, it provides better accessibility than the one provided by the stops, because the vehicles can be left in a more distributed area. But this accessibility will vary largely throughout the day. So in peak hours, there will be very few vehicles left for picking up, and then in off-peak hours you'll have much higher accessibility. So it means that the accessibility varies largely throughout the day, and this may create a sense of lack of robustness of the service availability. In contrast, the station-based systems with physical stops, they have, for instance, one pro of this system is that they have less rebalancing requirements, because you can decide where you put the stops, the stations. And if there's some region with very imbalanced demand, you can eliminate the stops there. So that if you don't have service in zones with a lot of imbalance, you reduce the rebalancing requirements. In contrast, you need the agreement with the municipalities or parking providers so that allow you to build this infrastructure, the stations. Another pro is that the accessibility to the system is constant, because the stations are fixed in a space. So you know beforehand which is going to be the accessibility to the system. But in contrast, you need to provide a good density of stops across the service region, good density of stations, otherwise the accessibility will be low. As commented before, the stations provide protection to vehicles so that they are less prone to vandalism. And finally, it's easier if you have stops to allow the vehicles to recharge when they are idle waiting for a user in the stop. So the recharging of batteries is easier if you have a station-based system. So the system is more, I would say, more reliable in a station-based fashion. Well, when you have identified all these variables, all these design variables, you need to define what's the value of them. To do that and obtain an optimal design, you need to analyze the relationship of these decision variables to costs. And when you have formulated these cost functions in function of the decision variables, you need to balance them, because there's a clear trade-off between the cost of providing the service and the cost of the users. For instance, if I put a lot of stations, I have a lot of infrastructure cost, but the user has a higher accessibility. So there is a trade-off between the different costs, and it's the optimal balance of this agency cost with respect to user cost, which defines an optimal service in vehicle sharing systems. So you need to balance the cost of the infrastructure. This means the cost of the fleet, cost of the vehicles, and the cost of the stations, if any, if you opt for a station-based system. You need to consider the repositioning cost, which is the cost of the repositioning teams. This is very expensive. The labor cost of the people moving the vehicles across different parts of the city. And then you need to also consider the operative costs, which is the power consumption, the vehicle maintenance and repair, and the control and system administration. This conforms the main costs of the agency which is operating the system. On the other hand, you have the user cost. The user costs mainly are the cost of accessing to the stations or to the vehicle if it's free floating, the walking distance to reaching, the average walking distance to reaching one of these vehicles. And then there's also the no service penalty. So the penalty if one user is unable to find an available vehicle when he needs to make a trip. So clearly, the optimal will imply some fraction of the demand not served, because it would be extremely expensive to cover 100% of the demand. It would imply an excessively big system with too many vehicles. So a fraction of the demand will be not served to reach this optimal design. But this user cost of no service penalty needs to be taken into account. Then the modeling of vehicle sharing systems. The modeling implies formulating all the trade-offs and relationships between these costs. For instance, inside the vehicle availability, inside the agency cost, the agency has two ways of providing vehicle availability: either increase the fleet size or increase the repositioning operations. The result is the same. You provide the same average service. You can provide it with more vehicles or with more repositioning operations. What is best? It will depend on the cost of the infrastructure cost of the vehicle and on the labor cost of the repositioning teams. Taking into account these two costs, you can balance the fleet versus the repositioning teams. Regarding the spatial coverage, the agency cost depends on the density of the stations. But then this is balanced by the user cost, which is the non-served demand and access distance. If you put very few stops, some of the service, part of the service area will not be covered. So part of the demand will be lost. And then you have a no service penalty. And if the density is low, the access distance will be high. So the accessibility will be lower, the user cost will be higher. So there's a trade-off between users and agency regarding the spatial coverage, density of stations versus non-served demand and access distance. So in our research, if you read the references, we have formulated these trade-offs in terms of the decision variables. And then by applying mathematical programming to reach an optimal solution, you can obtain the optimal variables for each type of system according to some input, for instance, according to the unitary costs and according to the average demand that is going to be serving this system. So I do not enter into details, but in this slide, inside each of these boxes and in each of these arrows, there's a mathematical formulation. So let me now shift to the application to the case study, which is the bike sharing system in Barcelona, the BSync system. This was an analysis we did with data of many years ago. So it was 2014 when we did this analysis. It was, and it's still a station-based system. So the BSync system is based on stations which are distributed across the city of Barcelona, covering most of the city. So the typical demand for the bike sharing in Barcelona is around 50,000 trips per day. The system is operating 24 hours. We analyzed the average imbalance of the BSync system, and we found that it's on average around 12%. This means that these 50,000 trips, 12% are not recovered. So it means that they need to be rebalanced. So there's origins that do not receive the same amount of destinations. So there's 12% of average imbalance that needs to be artificially rebalanced. The service area of Barcelona, as I said, is almost all the city is these 49 square kilometers. And the density, well, the number of stations there, it's 400 stations with approximately 10,000 parking slots for a fleet of 5,000 mechanical bikes. So now in 2014, all the bikes were mechanical. Today, we already have half of the fleet, which is of electrical bikes. So this has evolved since then. And the system was repositioned by 24 repositioning teams, 24 repositioning teams with a capacity for 32 bicycles per track. So the bicycles can be moved in groups. So we found also that on average, the no service rate was because of 30% of the stations were on average always empty, and 12% of the stations on average are full. So this is more or less the context of the BSync system. And now I'll explain how this cost and trade-off behaves in Barcelona system. So before we shift to that, so let me give you an idea of why the system is rebalanced in bike sharing. So here you see in this slide, you see in the vertical axis the demand imbalance. So when this imbalance is positive, it means that there are more requests than returns. And when it's negative, it means that there are more returns than requests. So here we have plotted groups of stations. Each data point in this graph, it's groups of stations. And on the horizontal axis, you have the average height. So you can see that there's a clear downsloping tendency in this plot. This means that the stations which are lower in height, so which are in the flat or lower parts of the city, receive more trips than generate, and those which are in the upper side of the city, they have more requests than returns. This is because people do not like cycling on a slope, cycling uphill. So the vehicles in the city of Barcelona and everywhere else in the world tend to precipitate. So the bicycles tend to accumulate in the lower parts of the city. Here you see, although a bit blurry, you see the map of Barcelona, and in red you see the zones, the stations with an over demand. So this is the high part of the city. So this area here, you have an over demand. In blue, you have more or less the balanced stations, and in yellow, you have more or less lower zones on the city where there is more vehicle returns, more bicycle returns than requests. So the rebalancing teams need to take the bicycles from this part and move them to the upper parts of the city all the day around. So here in this result, what you see is the sensitivity of the system cost with respect to the demand imbalance. The 1-1, this is in relative terms, so the 1-1 is the optimal case for the city of Barcelona now. So it's this 12% of imbalance. So it means what happens to the costs if the imbalance grows, for instance, twice. You can see how the costs grow. Okay, you can see that lower imbalance imply lower average cost, and higher imbalance implies higher average cost. Still, the sensitivity is low. So, for instance, doubling the imbalance rate only implies a 5% more cost. So, surprisingly, the average cost does not increase so much with the level of imbalance. You can see here also that the free-floating systems are more sensitive to the imbalance. This is because they do not have the regulatory effect of the stations that we have commented before. So next analysis, it's about the effect on the fleet of vehicles with respect to the cost of vehicles. So here you can see again, it's a relative figure. The 1-1 is the case that we have now in Barcelona. So the bicycle unitary cost is considered to be 400 euros per bike if you have a station-based bike, and 786 if you have a free-floating bike, because these free-floating bikes need to be equipped with GPS units, and they are a bit more expensive. So you can see what happens to the fleet and to the repositioning teams if the cost of these vehicles change. So for instance, here in the left axis, you see the relative size of the bicycle fleet. So you can see that if the cost of the bicycle, the unitary cost of one bicycle is reduced, you can see that then the optimal, what the agency will do is to increase a lot the fleet. And this is very non-linear for lower cost of the vehicles. This is what has happened, for instance, in China. In China, where you have vehicles that the bicycles there, they report cost of maybe around 30 euros. So 10 times more, 10 times less than the average cost that we considered for Barcelona. So if the vehicle is so cheap, what is going to do the agency is to multiply the fleet size by 4 or 5. So instead of having the 5,000 bicycles that we have in Barcelona, we would have 20,000. And in contrast, we reduce the repositioning teams. So this is what happened in China. The reduced cost of bicycles implied an extremely large fleet size of vehicle sharing and very low repositioning operations. So the repositioning operations, you have them in blue or red. So then if you increase so much the fleet size, you don't need to reposition them because bikes are everywhere, but they create these other problems of in the usage of urban space. On the higher cost, the sensitivity is much less. So if you have higher cost for each vehicle, the vehicle fleet will be not reduced much, and the repositioning teams will not increase much. So it's much more stable in the higher vehicle unitary cost zone. So the next analysis is about the number of parking slots with respect to the demand density. This again is relative. So one means the demand density with respect to the Barcelona one, which was this of 50,000 trips per day or 42 trips per kilometer square an hour. So if the demand is and then for this demand, we require more or less 1.9, so around 2 parking slots per vehicle. If the demand is larger, this ratio of parking slots per vehicle decreases a bit. If the demand is smaller, the ratio of parking slot increases a bit. But again, even if this is not linear, you can see that it's very unsensitive to the demand levels. So the demand needs to change a lot, and the number of parking slots per vehicle changes very little. So it's always between 1.85 and 2.1, let's say. So it means that this is quite stable. So if you're going to design a vehicle sharing system, it's a good policy to allow always for 2 parking slots for each vehicle that you have in the vehicle fleet. So this 2 value is quite robust, and it can be used as a good rule of design because it's quite insensitive to the demand levels. So next analysis about the economies of scale. The economies of scale is how the average cost of one trip changes with the demand level. So here we can see that there's some significant economies of scale. So in the vertical axis, you see the cost per trip. So here in blue, you have the station-based. Here in red, you have the free floating, and in dashed you have the fare. So not including the fare means the only considering the agency costs. So the difference between the fare and the other is the user cost. So if we compute into the generalized cost, we compute the axis and the no service penalties. Here you see the higher cost of the station-based is because the station-based has a higher access cost. It's not about the agency cost, but it's about the access of the user, this difference in the cost. And you see that the economies of scale are significant for very low demand levels. So if the demand levels are quite low, the cost tends to peak, the cost per trip. So this means And it's the reason why very small systems are not efficient and are not sustainable over time. So in contrast, if the demand is high, so for instance, from, I would say, a bit lower than the demand in Barcelona and for even 3 times more of the demand, the economies of scale are quite insignificant. So there's very little reduction in the average cost per trip for demand levels when you have achieved the threshold demand level, which makes the system sustainable. Well, last topic of today, it's about repositioning operations. We have talked about planning, and now let's talk a bit about operations. The most challenging operation of vehicle sharing systems is the repositioning. As we said, reposition is necessary because otherwise the system becomes rapidly unbalanced. You also need rebalancing operations to perform sometimes battery charging operations and to perform maintenance tasks. So to reposition the system is necessary, but there are different ways of doing that. So some systems opt for what's called the user-based repositioning, which means rely on the users to rebalance by themselves the system. This can be done by fair incentives. So you provide discounts or even pay for trips that go from zones where there's an accumulation of vehicles to zones where there's they are scarce. There's little amount of vehicles. If you do this vehicle, I pay you an incentive. And otherwise, if you perform a vehicle which is harmful for the system, this is very, very expensive. So using these incentives, you can, with the fares of the system, you can reduce the imbalance level of vehicle sharing systems. You can also use the stations, the location of the stations and their capacity as a regulator for the imbalance level. Obviously, if you have a station-based system, when the station is full, it does not allow to returning more vehicles. So it acts as a regulatory element of the imbalance levels. So the careful planning of the station's location, the careful planning of the station's capacity also allows to reduce the imbalance levels and the repositioning needs of the systems. The same things can be done with geofencing for free floating systems. If you have a free floating, you don't have the regulatory element of the stations, but then if you use geofencing, you may try to apply limitations on where the vehicles can be returned for different types of the day and penalize or even do not allow to return vehicles in some zones. Still, even if you have some level of user repositioning, you will always need an agency-based repositioning, which is some strategy that is developed by the operating agency to move the vehicles around the different zones of the city. If you have small vehicles like bicycles or scooters, you may reposition them in group, so in trucks or small vans, so that you can move several vehicles at the same time. If you have a car sharing system, this is more challenging because then each vehicle needs to be repositioned by driving the same vehicle. Finally, the repositioning also needs to account for battery recharging. So the battery recharging sometimes is done at the stations, so that the system, the repositioning teams need to move the vehicles requiring to recharge batteries to some of the stations which are equipped with battery charging devices. Sometimes some systems, there's what's called a hub recharging. So it means that there's a central hub where all the vehicles are moved when they need to recharge for vehicles. This is more popular in small vehicles. When you have micro mobility systems like shared scooters, then typically there's a recharging hub. And sometimes you can also perform what's called a battery swap strategy, so that it's the repositioning team that reaches the vehicle and then it changes the battery instead of moving the vehicle from one place to the other. I had here, let me see. I see that we're a bit short of time. I had a couple of slides on different strategies for repositioning and some results from the implementation in Barcelona. But I think that given that we have only a few minutes, I will skip these different strategies. I will post the slides so you can go through them. There's mainly just a summary. There's routing based or alarm based. So one it's very good for real time, the other has less distance traveled. So you can go through them, and I will go to the final conclusions to give some minutes for the questions. So my final thoughts of what we have talked, or how this is going to evolve in the future. Where for car sharing, I think that there's a well-established parking regulation across cities, so that free-floating systems work well because there's no unregular parking. The car sharing systems can be an alternative to ride hailing because there's no driver. Maybe the system is a bit cheaper, but then this needs to be compensated by the access cost and the repositioning cost. So I believe that car sharing is not overall much cheaper than the regular taxi systems or like the Uber-like systems. So I do not believe that car sharing will be a main actor in the urban mobility systems to compete strongly with other alternatives in the cities. In the future, when the vehicles will be autonomous, the ride hailing and the car sharing will be the same because none of them will have drivers. So then will be equivalent, and it will be one single system with car sharing or ride hailing. They both will have no access, they both will have no driver, and the repositioning will be autonomous. Regarding bike sharing or alike, I do think that they will be that they are already a new player in urban mobility. In their urban areas, they serve a fraction of the trips quite well. The risk is that these cheaper vehicles then will create huge fleets that will make the agency to tend to avoid repositioning, and this creates large vehicle accumulation in some parts of the city, and this needs to be avoided. So I think that the free-floating systems need to be strongly controlled, need to impose a maximum fleet size and strong parking regulations. If this cannot be done, cities need to opt for station-based, which I think that they should be preferred. And obviously, if the vehicles can be electrical, this widens the range, the distant range for these vehicles, so it even reaches a larger amount of people and types of trips. So more or less, these are the conclusions. Here you have the references, and I'm sorry that I've been a bit slow so that I could not present everything. Still 5 minutes for the questions. So thank you.